Dave Smith here. At today's Leader Forum, we heard from Garnett Weber, the CEO of iTrax, on how they maintain the human connection in their remote working teams. It's a fantastic story with impressive outcomes, both in terms of corporate capacity and business results, but also culturally. Keep your eyes on iTrax. We're working with organizations across Canada over the last couple of years. We've learned and shared a great deal. In fact, Dave Town is actually putting the finishing touches on a book that we expect to be releasing quite soon. There's been as well a tremendous amount of research that's been generated. Dave has taken the time and care to prepare a quick summary of research about the new reality of remote and hybrid working. Here it is. Over to you, Dave.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of research and then a few ideas in terms of this idea of maintaining the human connection. So KPMG did it. I've been reviewing a whole bunch of online research and surveys and polls, and I'm just sharing a small snippet of them that I think represent the mainstream of everything I'm reading. So KPMG talked about some key poll findings. 77% of Canadians like the idea of a hybrid workplace model. So companies that are not embracing this are 3/4 of your staff want this, right? 71% believe that it should be the standard. And I think that's growing. That's actually going to get bigger. This was back in May. It's getting even bigger, right? 81% say their managers need to be better trained. So 4 out of 5 employees don't think that managers know how to operate in a hybrid workplace team. And our findings in terms of anecdotally support that to some extent there are some skill sets that are missing with leaders because things have been disrupted. And 45% don't think their employer really understands the implications of a hybrid workplace model, which either suggests that they really don't, or that the workplace hasn't been good at communicating their hybrid workplace model. So that's really interesting. So then there's a HUME report. HUME is one of these companies that works with personnel. This was done in the fall of 2021, so very recently. Again, 84% close will return to the office in a full-time or hybrid capacity. That's what their responses were. So they see themselves coming back to the office. 67%, so 2/3 said the reason that they want to come back to the office was to see their coworkers again. So when we talk about maintaining the human connection, where we know that people want to get back into the office, not to do work with the employer, but to see their buddies. I mean, this is a really startling fact, right? 74% shared that the one thing they're dreading the most is commuting again. I suspect if you live in Toronto, that number is probably more like 95%, because the commute time was brutal, is brutal. Other concerns, loss of flexibility, fear of catching COVID-19, that's going to go away when we get into an endemic, and escalating levels of social anxiety, which I also think is part of the change in the health and safety issues. So one other report, and then I want to comment on this. OC Tanner said, when they surveyed employees and went and looked at what people were doing, people felt better working from home on any task requiring focus, including things like creativity, and especially around, and when we say meeting deadlines, this isn't a meeting deadline, this is meeting a deadline. So achieving deadlines, people felt much better about being able to achieve deadlines because they weren't being interrupted. What they also said, having said that, was it's more difficult to do tasks requiring collaboration and connection, problem solving, staying informed on what other teams are doing, participation in decision making, career advancement, making personal connections. So when you look at what some of what Garnett shared, I mean, she's really addressing this whole issue of what are the connections? How are we making those connections? How are we helping people with the things that are on the right side of the ledger? So what this says to me is that the conclusion for me is that hybrid work is here to stay. I was actually in a webinar, listening to a webinar this morning where he said, hybrid work is going to change to work. Within 2 or 3 years, we're not going to use the term hybrid work. We're going to call it work. And the natural, most organizations will be having in office and at home, and it'll just be the new norm. And the interesting phrase he used, so I'm going to borrow this from Kerry Newhoff, who I watched this morning. He said, leaders need to either disrupt or be disrupted, because we're in a disruption. So you can either have it happen to you or you can make it happen for you. And so the suggestion here is that for a leader, in-person needs to be more personal. And this is how we're going to maintain that human connection. We are going to be back in person for some periods of time, unless there's, as Garnett said, it's tailor it to the employee, but there may be some people, who really don't want to come in person. I think most people are going to want to have some in-person And so let's make it more personal. And the other piece that I would say is leaders may need to review their whole mission for what they have for their team members. And this is based on some of my interactions with other leaders. Do you want to ensure that people are busy, or do you want to ensure that people are productive? And I that sounds obvious, and people will say, well, they need to be in the office to be productive. And that's where I'm going to say, yeah, that's not the evidence. If you want people to be productive, stop measuring whether they're busy or not. Measure whether they're productive or not, and engage them like Garnett did. Those people who need to work from home to be productive, let them do that. Those people who need to be in an office to be productive, let them do that. This idea that there has to be a one solution fits all misses the point of what your leader mandate should be. As a leader, you need to be thinking about, why am I watching people? I actually coached someone who said, I need people to be in the office. I said, how come? He said, I need them to be productive. I said, well, how do you know they're productive when they're in the office? That was the answer, silence. He says, they're in their seats. I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of people who surf the internet when they're in their seats at the office. So here's the thing, right? We want to move forward with this. So I'm going to stop share. So here are some ideas. I'm going to stop the slides. I teach a course in organizational behavior. I love Garnett. I love the fact that your son came home with the 4-drive theory and motivation. So one of the exam questions. Culture has traditionally been nurtured by things like hiring people whose beliefs align with the organization, creating stories, having symbols, artifacts, all those things that represent culture. And I think what you saw in Garnett's presentation was that she's doing that, right? She's getting those artifacts, those symbols of our culture, and actual visuals of the culture in front of people. So people who are worried about maintaining that human connection from a distance, we need to be much more intentional about this, because hybrid workplaces are a real opportunity to be very flexible with the employees. If we believe that we're going to be in person sometimes and online sometimes, let's organize how we help people work differently. So when you're online and when you're at home, help people concentrate on work that requires focus. When you're in the common workspace or in the office, do the personal connections. So for example, one of the tools that we use in Virtual Leadership Matters is a tool that measures interdependencies within an organization. So which people are interdependent with others, who's on what team, and so on. And the reason this is important, because I was talking to one client and they said, we're letting people come back and we're giving them flexibility. They can come back, 2 days a week. Which days do they come back? That's their choice. So that's where I would actually create a boundary. I think that's a mistake. I think if you want to have personal connections, have all the IT people in on Mondays. Maybe give them another day that's optional, but one day of the week should be an intact team, should be in the office that day. I know that sounds a little prescriptive, but they still get to work from home other times. And the reason you bring them back in is because you want to take advantage of those personal connections. If we want to maintain the human connection, we're going to have to nurture that and be deliberate and intentional in our leadership about doing that. And so organizations need to measure how to strategically organize their hybrid workplace. Because I'm back to that. The study says employees don't think their managers get it. And I agree with that. I think there's a lot of people who don't really understand what it means to manage a hybrid workplace. What it means is I allow people to work from home a couple of days a week. It's way more complicated than that, right? And so if we want to maintain human connections, we need to think about people being in the same workspace at the same time and based on their interdependencies. There's other things that we can do. Having said that, when people are working from home, working remotely, the OC Tanner study, I didn't include that statistic, but one of the things they said was that 1 in 3 employees feels disconnected. So I love the things that Garnett's doing, because when they feel connected, we used to use the word engaged. I'm going to suggest that connected is the new word for engaged. When people are connected, they're engaged. So, what can you do? Training programs. I'm working with some training programs where we're creating small learning partner groups. And so people are connecting with one another to do training projects. People on projects are in small groups to work together. So they collaborate online, they collaborate together because that's part of the mantra of how the work has been allocated. They come back and report on it, and they feel more at ease in making these connections, even when they're working remotely. Our one-on-one meetings with employees, what we're finding is that have those meetings more frequently and have them shorter. And make those check-ins deliberate. So have an agenda of talking about feedback and giving people feedback on a regular basis. I mean, nothing has changed for the leader in terms of what they need to do. Teresa Mobile wrote a book called The Progress Principle that talked about, leaders that aren't giving people progress updates are finding that their people are disengaged. I'm going to suggest that the pandemic has been an accelerator. It has accelerated the need to employ these good management practices. So before maybe you could get away with not having good progress reports. Now you can't do that. You must do it. Just like being in retail and online has become an imperative, right? So if we want to make those connections, we need to be intentional and deliberate about it. Reorganize how we engage with people. I know one guy who was meeting with people much more frequently, and then they went back to the office. And the employee came to him and said, "Hey, can we meet more frequently? Can we use this rhythm of meetings now? Now that we're back in the office, I don't want to change this because I love how much we connect, even though it's much shorter." It wasn't more time for the leader. So, and one of the ways that a leader makes space for this, pick an hour in the day and have 5 of these 10-minute meetings. So chunk it off in batches so that you can make it work in a busy schedule. The creativity that Garnett talked about, so using symbols, refer to your cultural values on an ongoing basis, take icebreakers, videotape your onboard orientation so that you don't leave it to some manager who may have in the past not done it well. Make that something so the first day a person comes in, there's a videotaped orientation that really shares the values and the culture of the organization. So somebody knows exactly what it is that we stand up for. So these are all ways to maintain that connection. At the end of the day, I think organizations and leaders are going to have to embrace the idea that we're going to have to start creating more policies if we don't have them on how to work from home. How do we enable people and empower people? And once we do that, then we'll be much better at maintaining that human connection.
Sadly, we've arrived at that time where we have to conclude our conversation today. I want to thank Garnett very much for attending and sharing the special story about iTracks and how they keep the human connection very close. I want to thank Dave Town for sharing a terrific synthesis of research for you today. I also want to encourage you to check out the Mighty Networks for Virtual Leadership Network and then join in with some of your industry peers and start sharing information in a totally confidential mode. I also would ask you to look out for and attend the next Leader Forum, which is scheduled for March 10th. We will continue our conversation on culture. You are able to find information on that in our website, and we will certainly correspond with you to let you know that it's coming up. So it is certainly on your calendar. Thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again.